Hello, my name is Payton McIntyre, and with the help of my partner Brian Golden, we're going to discuss school law regarding discrimination and violence in the public schools. First, I would like to define discrimination. As defined by the Oxford Dictionary, discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex. The Association of Texas Professional Educators discusses discrimination in that significant employment decisions, including decisions about hiring, assignment, reassignment, evaluations, salaries, and terminations, may not be made on the basis of sex, national origin, race, color, religion, age, or disability. Within the public school education, what classifies as discrimination may include denied admission or differences in treatment of people based on sex, national origin, race, color, religion, age, or disability, applying any rule concerning any potential parental, family, or marital status of a student or job applicant, the exclusion of any person on the basis of pregnancy, childbirth, termination of pregnancy, recovery therefrom, sex, national origin, race, color, religion, age, or disability. Making a pre-admission inquiry as to the marital status of an applicant for admission, also discrimination. Lastly, advertising for a preference of sex, national origin, race, color, religion, age, or disability of a student or job applicant, not allowed. Okay, next I would like to define harassment. According to Red Cross, harassment is similar to bullying because someone hurts another person through cruel, offensive, and insulting behaviors. However, harassment is different from bullying because it is a form of discrimination. Harassment is prohibited by Title IX when it creates a hostile environment for the victim such that he or she can no longer fully participate in or benefit from school. A hostile environment can be caused by a single incident or by repeated instances of harassment, according to America's Promise Alliance. A few forms of harassment that you might come across in the school: sexual harassment, which ranges from unwanted sexual comments or advances to cyberbullying, to any non-consensual sexual contact. That could occur between students to students, students to teachers, or within the staff. Another form of potential harassment would be gender-based harassment, which is when an individual is bullied because they don't conform to gender stereotypes. An example of this would be if a boy wore a dress to school and was bullied for it. Not cool. Gotta put a stop to it. Okay, Title IX. It was part of the Education Amendments of 1972, and it was designed to eliminate discrimination in any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, according to the U.S. Department of Education. This applies to all teachers, students, staff, regardless of gender identity, sexual orientation, nationality, immigration status, race, or ability, within all education programs from elementary to college, private and public both included. There are very, very few exclusions to this. That would include social sororities and fraternities, YMCA, YWCA, the Boy Scouts, and the Girl Scouts. Okay, educators' responsibilities to keep discrimination, harassment, and all forms of violence out of the schools. Schools must create, publish, and widely distribute an anti-discrimination policy. The policy must affirm the school's commitment to non-discrimination on the basis of sex, race, age, ability, nationality, etc., and include clear definitions of consent, harassment, discrimination, violence, bullying, cyberbullying, and hazing. The policy must also provide instructions on how students and members of the community can make complaints and contact their Title IX coordinator. 2, the schools must provide interim accommodations to protect complainants while the complaint is under investigation. It is the school's responsibility to minimize the burden on the complainant such that a person who comes forward with a complaint is not penalized for speaking out. 3, Schools must make sure that victims are aware of existing resources such as counseling, academic support, and legal assistance. 4. Schools must appoint a Title IX coordinator to train faculty, staff, and students on rights and obligations under Title IX. The coordinator's job is to receive complaints of harassment or violence and oversee the school's response. They are also responsible for creating healthy, equitable environments and identify and respond to systemic form of discrimination in addition to individual instances. It's important that the Title IX coordinator doesn't have any prejudices or biases or has any relation to the school at all. So it can't be a principal or an athletic coach or someone related to the school in any way. It's got to be someone outside of that. 5, schools must publish the coordinator's name and contact information in a readily accessible way such that all students are able to reach the coordinator. Teachers, our responsibility is to identify and attempt to solve the problem. That might include separating the students or limiting contact between the parties, changing classes, providing alternative support and opportunities to make up work for all parties involved. It is also our duty to report and avoid deliberate indifference, which means deliberate indifference is when teachers notice something suspicious or sketchy going on and doesn't get involved or report it to higher up authorities or investigate further. If you ignore it, you will be liable and could potentially be sued in the future. An example of this is Doe versus Taylor School District. There was a student in the Taylor School District, they called her Jane Doe, who had been reported having developed a inappropriate relationship with a coach at the school. And this had been going on for the entire time that she was at the high school, and when she graduated, she finally decided to speak up against it. During those 4 years in high school, many of the teachers and staff, as well as community members and students, had reported noticing that something was going on between the coach and the student. But the principal turned a blind eye and failed to report to higher authorities or investigate further. This case made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the only person held accountable was the principal for his lack of involvement. In your fine arts classroom, it is important to develop a learning community, listen to your students, monitor student behavior, and teach your students to value kindness as well as the appreciation of the fine arts in order to protect your students and maintain the integrity of your classroom. I'll now pass it off to Brian Golden, who's going to talk about hazing, bullying, cyberbullying, and violence in the schools. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so my part of the project, we will be talking about hazing, bullying, school violence, and cyberbullying. So the first slide we have hazing. So basically, hazing is any intentional act that is usually directed against a student for the purpose of humiliating an individual who is being initiated into an organization. So typically like a frat or a sorority, regardless of the person's willingness to participate. So some of the types of hazing that we have are physical brutality, causes anything that causes sleep deprivation, psychological abuse, abusive consumption of food, liquid, drugs, or any other substances. So typically in these situations, you have students who are trying to be initiated, and part of the process sometimes they have to go through, intaking in food, liquid, drugs, psychological abuse, or physical brutality. All these things are something that a person doesn't want, but they're going through it just so they can get initiated into the frat or sorority. And these criminal offenses can be very high, depending on what happens to that particular person. So failing to report a hazing is considered as a Class A or B misdemeanor. And punishments for that can be up to $2,000 to $2,000 to $4,000 fine, or a 180-day prison sentence, or it can be both. If the victim dies in this situation, it can be a felony, which is one of the highest charges you can get. And for that, the punishment could be up to 180 days to life in prison, a $10,000 fine, or community supervision, or it can be all those at once. So here we have bullying. This is the next slide. So bullying is basically a single significant act or pattern of acts directed at another student that exploits an imbalance of power and involves engaging in written or verbal expression or physical abuse. So the school district's definition of bullying would be anything that occurs on school property or at a school-related activity. So anything regarding the definition that happens on school property or at a school-related activity, occurs on a public or private owned school bus or a vehicle that is being used to transport children to and from school or a school-related activity, or cyberbullying that occurs off school property or outside a school-sponsored event. So next slide, we have school violence. This is the next topic. And basically, school violence is physical acts that target students, disrupts the learning environment, and has a negative effect on students and the school's community. So some of these examples are bullying, cyberbullying, which we'll be talking about, fighting, weapon usage, gang violence, sexual violence, or sexual harassment. So some of the statistics. In 2019, the CDC did a youth risk behavior survey, and they administered 13,677 students living in the USA in high school. According to these results, about 1 in 5 high school students reported being bullied on school property. More than 1 in 12 high school students reported being cyberbullied in the last year. 8% of high school students have been in a physical fight on school property 1 or more times during the 12 months before the survey. More than 7% of high school students have been threatened or injured with a weapon or on school property 1 or more times during the 12 months before the survey. And lastly, 9% of high school students have not gone to school at least 1 day during the 30 days before the survey because they felt threatened and unsafe on their way or from school. And the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, Division of Violence Prevention, this right here, they are the ones who were involved with these statistical observations. So how can we prevent school violence? So addressing these factors at the individual, relational, community, and societal levels will help address school violence. Teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and even students have the power and can do a lot in preventing school violence. So the CDC developed some technical packages to help states and communities take advantage of the best available evidence to prevent violence. And some of these are intimate partner violence, child abuse, sexual violence, suicide, and youth violence. So lastly, we have cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is basically any use of electronic communication to bully a person, typically by sending messages of an intimidating or threatening nature. So any threatening messages or anything a student does to belittle another student over an electronic device is basically cyberbullying. In 2016, there was a 16-year-old Texas student. I'm not really sure where they were from or what school district they were from, but they were subjected to cyberbullying and they committed suicide, which is why the Davis Law was created. And the Davis Law basically states that school districts have to include cyberbullying in their policies and notify parents immediately if their child has been the victim of bullying. So some of the 7 best practices that we get from the 7 best practices for addressing cyberbullying article. The first one would be know your policies. So teachers must know the policies for cyberbullying so they can pinpoint it. Practice 2, teach staff to recognize the signs. So sign would be a student with withdrawing from activities or withdrawing from any school related thing, anything like that could be a potential sign of cyberbullying. And the teachers need to recognize the signs so they can pinpoint it quick enough before it gets out of hand. The third practice is to educate students, host assemblies that incorporate activities and interactive exercises that inform students on cyberbullying, so activities in and out of the classroom. Four is respond promptly. So respond very quickly to these signs, and teachers must notify parents, and they must provide assistance to the victim. So make sure the victims know it's going to be safe, that, that they're going to be safe, and that the situation will be handled quickly. And also, of course, dealing with the person who is dealing with the person who is causing the victim harm in a fast manner. Number five is do not make victims feel isolated, make them feel wanted, make them feel like they're going to be safe. Number six is keep parents and guardians informed, like we just talked about. And lastly, involve law enforcement when necessary. So the David Law allows any public elementary, middle, or high school to make a report to law enforcement. You have the power to go to the law enforcement if it comes down to those steps. So don't feel afraid. Don't feel afraid to talk to law enforcement about these types of things if it gets that bad. Here's our bibliography. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you.